Cool. So we have been talking at length now through the kind of the history and evolution of human cultures, plural, and talking through a bunch of different time periods. And on Thursday last week, we got up to the point of basically about 1980. So definitely we're now within living memory. We're not talking about people who've been dead and gone for a really long time. And we're starting hopefully to see that some of the stuff that we're talking about is still kind of recognizable in some form today on the landscape, right? The Hanging Gardens of Babylon have been gone for thousands of years, but we still have maybe, at your parents' house, if you're heading home for Thanksgiving coming up, that, they have like a hanging planter on the back porch or something like that. And the principle of why somebody would erect an enormous ziggurat and why your mom or your dad might hang a hanging planter on the back porch, right? Human nature hasn't really changed, we think, maybe much, in all of that time. We have changed a bunch of our features of society, right? Democracy is a relatively recent invention of the last few thousand years. Technology obviously is changing a lot. And so we kind of left off the discussion on Thursday talking about since 1980, in like the time period, the lifetimes of people who are still working today, what does forest and outdoor recreation management, or as a profession, kind of look like based on, things like the Great Depression and so forth, and federal interventions to build out national parks with Mission 66 following World War II and stuff like that. So these days, we have a whole bunch of issues and needs that are trying to, and management of those issues and needs in forest and outdoor recreation is very much trying to just keep up with those things, right? So 50 years ago, we didn't have sand buggies or dune rails, or we were just starting to, in the 1970s, have garage mechanics basically tearing cars apart, welding custom frames, dropping in, a Chevy or a Ford engine or something like that, and re-gearing it using home machined components or very much aftermarket niche components and stuff like that to put together a vehicle that can do something like this, right? So it's not until the 1970s and 80s where technology kind of springboards us past what forestry professionals, what recreation land management professionals have been expecting, capable of managing, and stuff like that, right? So up until this time, for thousands of years, if you're a forester in ancient Greece or something like that, let's say they had foresters that are recognizable to us in that old society, right? People are pretty much riding a horse or walking around in the forest. Now, starting about 1960, 1970, 1980, especially towards the 80s end of things, we are way past just walking around, riding horses, very occasionally running a marathon between Greek cities and stuff like that. So now we find the pace of change in forestry recreation management based on the advancement of technology, and in specific, the cheap but dirty availability of highly energy-dense fuels, fossil fuels or battery electric power. Either one of those is extremely energy dense, right? So for the kilograms of lithium and cobalt in your electric car's battery, or for the gallons, gasoline is about 6 pounds per gallon, water is about 8 pounds per gallon, right? So it's lightweight, but it's very dense as a liquid fuel. And it's a fungible energy source. You can charge up that car anywhere. You can gas up that sand rail or that dune buggy anywhere, and it kind of works the same. So now we have the ability to input a lot more energy into these environments that may not be engineered or naturally adapted for coping with this kind of energy expenditure, to do something like, let's see how fast we can get up this sandy hill, right? Just kind of for that, as we've called it this past week, the joy of movement, why is somebody pressing this accelerator and climbing up this wall? It's cool, right? So as foresters, specifically as recreation management professionals, right, we're recognizing that this isn't an evil impulse. It is, however, a physically very destructive one. And your efforts to provide people the opportunity to enjoy things like this has to be tempered with, has to be balanced against, or filtered through the capacity of the land to handle it, all right? So alongside internal combustion engines, alongside battery electric systems these days, right, we have advanced materials composites. Starting with the space age, in the space race in the 1960s, we have NASA developing new alloys. We have NASA developing non-metal materials like fiberglasses, like carbon fiber composites, like advanced ceramics, right, to do the absolutely extremely difficult task of moving humans safely into space and then moving them back. And it doesn't always go well, but from that we get advanced material composites like single monocoque shell, polycarbonate, or polystyrene block copolymer kayaks and stuff like that. And we don't have to hand build every single one of them from birch strips or something like that, right? So it might take a craftsman, an artisan, at the peak of their skill, it might take that person 6 months to hand build a kayak out of wood and make it beautiful and functional and safe and durable, right? Now we can just have a factory somewhere kind of crap these out by the 100 per day. And you can buy a kayak at Rural King now, right? So advanced manufacturing plus advanced materials means a lot more people can afford to go to a place that used to only be accessible to coastal Native Alaskans, right? Now we can just throw that kayak on Crab Orchard and paddle around. We're probably not going to see any orca on Crab Orchard. If we do, something has gone horribly wrong. But get a cool video of it. And then get away because orca are predators. All right, so we also are dealing with sort of the proliferation of information, the diffusion of knowledge, data, information, and culturally tagging that information to sell you things and to make you aware of amazing spots on the surface of the planet that up to this point you might only be able to read about if you were literate and you had the inclination to look in some dusty old geographic tome about this amazing waterfall system, right? It is far from here. And before we had things like digital cameras, it was very difficult for most people to know about this. Before we had social networks, social media networks, it was extremely difficult for those videos to get diffused across society. But now that it's as simple as everybody has a camera in their pocket and everybody has basically worldwide cellular information access to blast a video like this with its location information out to a couple of billion other people with that camera in their pocket, that phone in their pocket, and all of the infrastructure to hook those different moving and mobile parts together, right? That changes where people go. That changes what people want to do when they get there. And so park rangers are on the receiving end of those changes. So videos that look cool mean that, for example, in places like scenic valleys in Vermont, every fall, like a couple weeks ago, was leaf peeping season up in Vermont, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, right? And millions of people drive from Philadelphia, New York City, Boston, all these places out into the northern New England countryside to go leaf peeping and look at this stuff. And as specific places get posted on social media, other people next year go to that specific place instead of just going for a drive anywhere in northern New England, which is a pretty big area. So social media tends to concentrate and spike the use at places way beyond what that place ever expected or experienced before. And sometimes if you happen to own a particularly scenic farm in a little valley in some forested cove in Vermont, and some influencer posts that to their millions of followers, well, a whole bunch of those followers the next year are going to go see that spot. And you're just a private landlord. You're just trying to do your farm in this spot. And all of a sudden, thousands of people, up to thousands of people per day, are showing up outside of your house and making it weird, right? This is all within sort of the broader umbrella of forest and outdoor recreation. So we got to deal with this. We got to understand the powerful effects of mass media popularization, right? People get an idea to do something funny and dumb or cool, and lots of other people get the idea. So what limited the spread of stupidity before, right? This hype train now has no brakes. Okay, so let's skip by a couple of key figures review. We've talked a lot about them. What this brings us into management-wise, from the 80s and 90s, it gets us into the 2000s. And in this phase, in amidst this sort of regime or milieu of everybody telling everybody else through social media where to go, how to act, what to do and not do at state parks, local parks, national parks, and so forth through social media, we have the management agencies, the organizations, realizing that, oh man, the world is way more complex now as a result of this rapidly advancing technology, rapidly cheapening technology, rapid proliferation of social media. It's harder to be a land manager now. And a lot of the big easy strokes, like taking a huge chunk of the state of Wyoming entirely and designating it as Yellowstone National Park, well, that was done 150 years ago, right? All the easy stuff, the low-hanging fruit's already been picked. So now what a lot of our state and federal agencies are doing in terms of management, in terms of day-to-day forestry and rec management stuff, the boots on the ground work, is we do it through partnerships. Instead of the National Park Service saying, this is our national park, we are going to manage this, and thank you very much for your input, but we got this. Now there are explicit and very, very extensive efforts to partner with not-for-profit organizations like the Nature Conservancy, WWF, Ducks Unlimited, right? Whitetail associations, stuff like that, right? So not-for-profit organizations now do a lot of the stuff that the federal, the state, the local agencies, and units of government for public forestry management used to do on their own. So this is cool. It's way more powerful. It's potentially, if it's done right, and it's not an automatic thing, if it's done right, well then we're gonna have a whole lot more experts on the public and the private side now doing collabos and versus and feature tracks, right? This is awesome. But it's also more complex, like it's just less straightforward. So for example, on summer camp this year, we went to a place called C&O Canal National Historic Park. And C&O Canal National Historic Park is a national historic park. So it's not a national park, it's a national historic park. Similar, but not the same thing exactly. On the Potomac River in Washington, D.C. So if you zoom out on the map, the municipality, or the District of Columbia more permanently, is basically a big square in Maryland and Virginia. And it's not a state, it's not just a city, it is its own sort of weird little district. And the license plate motto on license plates in Washington, D.C., does anybody know what that is?
It's all about not being a state.
Taxation without representation, right? Real middle finger to the seat of power of the Western world, right there in that city. So, we got the Potomac River, we've got the District of Columbia, and we've got this narrow little strip of a National Historic Park on basically one side of the Potomac River. It's like 160 miles long, a few hundred meters wide in a lot of places. It's a National Historic Park that preserves and provides access to a historic canal towpath system, partially designed by George Washington. You may have heard of him. And inside the river, there are a bunch of these rocky islands. So this is a real deep, steep-walled, channelized river, 80-foot-high walls, might be a few hundred feet wide, and every time it floods, it just fills that up and then overtops. And so the flood change on this flood stage can be 80 feet, no problem, without even really worrying about it. We're pretty far downstream on the Potomac River. We're close to the Atlantic Ocean, where C&O Canal National Historic Park is. So, one of the islands in the middle of the Potomac River is basically, historically was owned by the Nature Conservancy. And the Nature Conservancy isn't necessarily automatically trying to be a land manager for all the lands that it is, that it gets donated to it, or that it buys, or acquires through land swaps or whatever. Or somebody wealthy passes away and they write in their will, I want my land to go to the Nature Conservancy to be managed for ecosystem purposes, not just carved up and sold off to developers and put another useless strip mall in. So the Nature Conservancy owns a bunch of land, and they run that land for conservation and preservation purposes, according to their sort of reason for existence. As a not-for-profit organization, they get a tax break. They're a tax-exempt organization because they provide some public benefit to you and me and all Americans. So the government says it's going to be less expensive for you to operate. We're not going to charge you any taxes as an organization, but you have to clearly provide some public benefits. So we got this National Historic Park right here. We got this island, Bear Island, in the Potomac River right next to this National Historic Park. So a little while ago, Nature Conservancy approached the National Park Service and said, well, hey, we have this beautiful, busy, recreational island in the middle of this river right next to your National Historic Park. We'd like to kind of sort of quasi-donate this land to the National Park Service, entering into territory, additional expanded territory, additional habitat of this National Historic Park right next door, but we don't want to just give it to you or sell it to you for $1 or sell it to you even for the land value. We want to co-own it with you, right? So this is a international, huge, Nature Conservancy does stuff all over the world, a huge international not-for-profit organization entering into a situationship with an agency of the federal government, right? Like their Facebook status is it's complicated. And all the management of Bear Island, which has rare, threatened, and endangered plant and animal communities on it, has to check all of the boxes of all of the goals, all the missions, all the legal requirements that the Nature Conservancy has to hit. And because it's co-managed by the United States National Park Service, it also has to hit all the goals, do all the on-site compliance, follow all the laws that the National Park Service has to follow. So it's hard to manage this, but it's really valuable to co-manage this because this is where a ton of the actual forest and outdoor recreation associated or filtered through or run through the National Historic Park, this is where people actually go to do stuff, right? And we hiked part of the Billy Goat Section A trail on that island on summer camp and did this rocky traverse and saw some cool rock formations and whitewater rapids and stuff. It's a really cool spot in the middle of this huge metro area. And it's a beautiful natural spot in the middle of a very proximate urban environment, okay? And this is totally an exemplar of this partnership approach to how increasingly state, federal, and local park systems are doing stuff. So all that to say, if you want to be a park ranger or do wildlife biology in a protected area context, not just like people's farms and stuff like that, if you want to do stuff like this, you're not limited as of the 2000s to working for a federal agency or working separately for somebody like the Nature Conservancy. And the Nature Conservancy does hire forestry people a lot. You're not limited to just those, right? It opens up all of the thousands of not-for-profit organizations, big and small, that do any kind of land management. Very cool stuff. So that's good news for you and me, right? When we go out job searching, we're not just looking at usajobs.gov for stuff that Uncle Sam is sort of trickling out, and we're not subject to being completely screwed when, for example, the Forest Service says, we hired too many people last year and a couple of years ago, so we're not going to hire anybody except for the fire hire this year. Sorry. Call us again next year, right? You don't have to sit on your hands for a year just doing nothing in terms of forestry. You can find any of these organizations, hire on with them, and still be working inside of a national park or a national park-like unit like a national historic park, okay? So, all that to say, you got a big net to cast when it comes time to figure out your next summer job. And again, now is the time of year to be doing that. So I just saw that to encourage you guys. That brings us up, right? So obviously we're into the aughts now, or the noughties, as the demographers call that time period, the 00s. Let's talk about what things look like today. So now family pets are coming with families to parks. And this has ecological consequences, like it does for that fish, right? People are bringing their cats to national parks now, and their emotional support turkeys and everything else. And so when a dog goes off leash and chases down your wildlife that you are working so hard to provide and protect, and so forth, that means something for you as the park ranger. So pets, veterinary care, stuff like that, that was one of relatively very few industries that was COVID proof, right? The economy just went pants on head stupid for a couple of years during the pandemic and all that stuff. Like, things got weird, right? But people caring for their pets did not. That was one of the few things that did just fine and actually exploded in popularity and in money spent, value spent, during the pandemic. So this means that when you're thinking about trail design, you need to think a lot harder about wildlife impacts and where you want to bring visitors. Because a dog, if you hike 1 mile, the dog that is with you on or off leash will hike up to an average of about 4 times what you hike, right? The dog runs ahead on the trail and, sniffs out some wildlife up there and then runs back to you to check on, make sure you're still there, and then runs behind you and runs ahead and so forth. So they're covering up to 4 times the mileage that you are. That is extra trampling pressure, and that's a lot of extra wildlife disturbance pressure ecologically. So that's okay, right? Dogs are not evil. This is a very good boy. But we do need to factor this in how we manage ecosystems when we're bringing visitors in, because the visitors are bringing pets in. And pets, we have to consider as charismatic fauna for the purposes of this class, right? So charismatic fauna are species that we, as humans, invest additional emotional meaning or value or weight, pathos into. Dogs, absolutely. Cats, maybe, maybe not, right? So functional magnetic resonance imaging studies in the brains of humans reveals that we use the same part of the brain to think about dog pets as we think about children or younger relatives. And we don't think about cats using that part of the brain in quite the same way. Interesting stuff. And dogs are so cute, right? How could you not take this dog on your swimming trip? and it's an excuse to go on Amazon and get the cute little doggy life jacket and accessorize, right? So people do this stuff. This is how a lot of people are thinking about their trip to your national park, whatever that might be. They're actually thinking about their dog more and about the park less, if that makes sense. So we have to do some of that other thinking around them and help them make that work for them and the park and the wildlife species and so forth, right? People are susceptible to persuasive communications such as marketing and advertising, and will buy things for their pets that the pet doesn't necessarily understand. So these are protective booties. They have a rubber sole, so they are anti-slip and help prevent soft tissue injuries like the equivalent of an ACL tear in a dog, right? If a dog slips on ice, for example, they can tear ligaments and tendons just like humans can. And these help to prevent their paw pads from getting sliced up, help to prevent them from slipping and so forth. But this is a very unusual, unexpected sensory input for the dogs. And so, right, you have this grand plan. We're going to go on this huge national park trip, and we got our dog Rex these cute little booties. And then we actually got there and put them on, and it was a disaster. Like, we didn't even get 100 yards down the trail, right? So pets affect how people are recreating, where people are going, with the effects on wildlife, and so on and so forth. And with this, please don't actually recreate this at home. This is a joke image, but technology and pets interface and are changing what's possible. We also now have, for the first time, synthetic alternatives to forest and outdoor recreation things. So, for example, rock climbing. Most of us hopefully have been to the rock wall at the Student Recreation Center, and that's cool. That takes a lot of pressure off of the foresters trying to manage places like Jackson Falls Natural Area for things like climbing, but also for things like sustainably managing the glacial remnant, extremely rare ice age vintage plant communities tucked in the little cracks in the bluff line at Jackson Falls and across the Shawnee National Forest that were left behind when the glaciers retreated. So those species aren't particularly weird or unusual for like northern central Canada, but they're super weird that they're here, and they are kind of trapped here. They're marooned in those sort of cool little crevices in the sandstone walls of the Shawnee Bluff Country, which means that the Forest Service has to protect them like a rare, threatened, or endangered species or community. So having the option to say, hey, look, we love rock climbing, we just can't have you do it here. Are you aware of the climbing gyms in St. Louis? Are you aware of the climbing walls in Carbondale? The student rec climbing wall is, or was at one point, a world record holder in terms of aspects of its size and complexity. All right? So technology is creating new opportunities. It's pushing people into places where they've never been before. And in some ways, done right, it's also taking pressure off of you as the park ranger for having to, or some visitors feeling like you have to provide them all of the possible different things to do, right? This is a valid answer for somebody who wants to challenge themselves rock climbing. All right? Bike touring, or bike packing as it's called instead of backpacking, is really nice and requires certain kinds of infrastructure to get the bike from place to place. But a bike packer can cover 70, 80 miles a day, no problem. And if any of you guys have ever seen somebody with panniers, so bicycle saddlebags basically on the front and back wheels, maybe in the frame of the bicycle in the triangle, and looking, kind of shaggy like me or whatever, they might be in Carbondale here on the Transamerica Bike Trail. How many guys were aware of the Transamerica Trail running through Carbondale? Yeah, this is a major stop on a coast-to-coast bike trail that runs 3,000 miles, whatever it is, from California to a couple different East Coast states. There's a northern, the central tier, which Carbondale is on, and then a southern tier as well. So periodically you'll see people bikepacking right through Carbondale and stopping at the bike shops in town and getting food and stuff like that. So bikepacking is a relatively new set of technologies, and the bikes themselves, wasn't really until the 1970s where we had things like anything other than a road bike or like a beach cruiser. So mountain bikes started showing up in Marin County, California, not until really the 1970s with California stoners like Gary Fisher riding down at high speed forest roads. Up on those forested heights, kind of by the coastal redwoods and stuff like that in California. And they figured out they needed to invent mountain bikes because the beach cruisers, they were trying to take down these hairpin turns on these old logging roads, which were not designed for biking whatsoever. People were getting injured. Or the bikes were just coming apart because they weren't engineered to handle that kind of stress that mountain biking puts on. We're also seeing amazing advancements in personal protective equipment like bike helmets. Some high-end bike helmets now have crash sensors and deployable airbags to protect your cervical region around your neck from impacts. This also has the follow-on effect of the more attention you're paying to your personal protective equipment, the more PPE that you have, the better seatbelt that you have, equivalent for your bike, for example, the more and more severe risks you tend to take on that bike, right? So we are better able to keep people alive bicycling and mountain biking in rugged terrain. At the same time, we have some perceived incentive to take bigger risks because we have those helmets. And so at some point, we get out past the tolerance of what the human body itself can handle, right? And it doesn't matter how good your helmet is, but people are more likely to take this cliff edge ride when they're wearing a helmet. Now think about how crazy that is. The helmet can't save you, but it sure feels a little bit more comforting to take this intense risk with the helmet on, right? So we have to recognize that as park rangers, that our technologies make things more accessible, make them easier and safer, but also push us, some of us, to take much bigger risks that we never would have thought about before the helmet was maybe lulling us into a sense of security and safety. So this is opening up new routes to things. This is a helmet cam video of somebody experiencing an uncontrolled descent down a mountain and having to self-arrest with their ice axes and crampons. Crampons are metal spikes that are strapped onto your mountaineering boots. Ice axes are exactly what they sound like. They're not like hatchets for chopping things. They are ice axes basically with points for digging into ice. So the procedure here is to flip on your tum-tum, kick in with your toe spikes, and arrest, hang on to, dig into the ice with both hands on ice axes, and either climb your way back up or down climb to safety, either way. Okay? Ice axes are a new thing. Crampons are pretty old technology. People used to just hammer roofing nails through the wooden boot soles of their boots and just walk on metal spikes for a while through ice and snow. We're also seeing, and this is more of a communication technology effect, in park and wildlife management, we're seeing things like dark tourism. So following things like Hurricane Katrina, remember that big tragedy down south? For the next year or two, a lot of tour operators down there were making bank because people wanted to see, even right after the flooding of New Orleans and so forth, boats were going through and people were paying money to be on those tour boats to watch the devastation and the human cost of that very intense hurricane damage. The hurricane itself wasn't terrible, but when the levees started failing and so forth, right, a lot of people died. And so there were some examples of people getting on these tour boats and crowing about seeing dead bodies, right? Think about that. Somebody paying money to go on a tour to see fellow Americans floating in the water, right? This is this is a pretty dark side of humanity. And while this may or may not have been a thing in the past, it's certainly much more visible now with 24-hour news cycles and so forth. So dark tourism is something that park and wildlife managers, this isn't really anybody's like first job responsibility, but it can be a collateral duty, looking out for stuff like this and shutting it down. Also, right, we now have people skydiving from the edge of space. This is Felix Baumgartner in a Red Bull sponsored jump. Red Bull sponsors all kinds of forest and outdoor recreation stuff so that they can sell more sugar chemical slurries. And it works. That's why they do it. On the upside, though, we are getting some assistive technologies. So this is a walking wheelchair, able to move over complex terrain. And national parks are now, so it's the Grand Canyon, right? You can now access meaningful parts of Grand Canyon and lots of other national parks thanks to the Americans with Disabilities Act and the slow revision of things like front country or visitor center proximate trails to be paved, to be very level, to have accessible features involved. And then for folks with alternative mobility needs, competitive sports have started to provide expertise in robotics, prosthetics, cybernetics. So cybernetics is the control of systems through computerization, right? So for example, an amputee can now have a motorized articulated prosthetic arm, which is running off of sensors attached to that person's upper arm. So the person imagines closing their fist and the robotic fist closes. That's cybernetics. So to the extent we're seeing stuff like this, getting more people out onto trails, out onto ski slopes, out doing forest recreation stuff, right? This is all upside. We're all in favor of this. We are somewhat less in favor, for example, of things that make more places accessible to everybody. So things like four-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, high clearance technology in a work truck context that makes a lot of sense. In somebody's garage queen F-150 that has never gotten dirty before in the world until they take it to a national park and try to go off-roading in it, because they can, because this is the first vehicle that they've had that's four-wheel drive, all-terrain, something like that. That's a real problem for us as park rangers. All right, so we want to deal with that and confront that and understand that those technologies, right, just the fact that we can do this, we can turn any four-wheel drive truck or car into a snow machine. We can absolutely do this. And this isn't that expensive as an aftermarket upgrade to your vehicle, right? You just get these four things, you chain them onto the chassis, and you drive up onto there, and you can go anywhere in snow or other soft terrain. But treads absolutely shred the bejesus out of forest forbs or grassies or sedges, stuff like that, right? So tank treads, truck treads like this, great for a professional context, but they are technically available to everybody with an F-150 or whatever, and so forth. So as foresters, we gotta be aware of this. We gotta not be surprised when somebody gets their truck stuck or they drive over some critical habitat or something. That's a thing, right? We are always looking for new ways to be able to move through our environment. This is a head-mounted tripod helicopter system, technically an autogyro. So this is like some crazy inventor figuring out how to do this. And now, like, where is this guy gonna go to do this? After he conquers his local park, he's gonna go to your national park, right? And we gotta figure out, okay, is this safe for him? Is this safe for anybody else around, right? Helicopters, small-scale helicopters are really good at decapitating people. You see it in RC remote control helicopter communities all the time. Somebody will post a video of somebody getting their throat slit by high-speed rotors. It's nuts. Anyway, let's see what else. The advent of sponsorships like Red Bull, for example. So Red Bull will pay athletes, will pay pilots, will pay skydivers and base jumpers, anybody who is doing anything forest and outdoor recreation wise that is exciting or risky, or at least perceived to be risky, and so forth, which brings the potential upsides and downsides of having that event or that activity on your park or whatever, all so that the company can make even more money, right? So our park system doesn't exist to service commercial desires or pay shareholders increased value for companies attached to forest and outdoor recreation like Red Bull is. So we got to deal with that. And that means we need to be on top of things like special use permits that put a contract between your national park, let's say, and this company that's trying to make a whole bunch of money by spending a bunch of money on advertising, right? So Red Bull is a prime example. It's Monster Energy Drinks, sponsors a lot of forest and outdoor recreation adjacent stuff, and gives a lot of people an idea of, oh man, I saw this sick video. Let me see if I can do that the next time I'm out there, right? So diffusion of ideas from a marketing context to a private recreationist context is tough. Also, our new technologies, our social media, it can give people the idea to do something that puts them outside the bounds of what the human body can tolerate in terms of just the basic physics of slapping water at 60 or 70 miles an hour. Right? So like, haha, funny video for us, but that's potentially a life-changing injury for that person, okay? So we need to wrestle with that, because in us seeing this video, it's like that movie Inception. Now we have at least some mental category for, man, wouldn't it be funny if I convinced, not me, but some other idiot to try to ramp their bicycle off into a pond at our next family reunion or whatever, and maybe or maybe not consider the issues involved. So in places like California, gravity boarding, so high-speed downhill skateboarding, is a thing, and it makes for really cool GoPro videos, right? Action cam. But for everybody who's just trying to use this road to get from point A to point B, right, when one of these guys hits a car at 40 or 50 miles an hour, that's changing everybody's life for what? A GoPro video, right? So technology, not always great. Definitely at least very capable at extending what is possible, whether or not it is wise. On the upside, though, we are getting some new technologies that are purpose-built for industries like ours. So if you want to go into trail building and designing professionally, you might look into getting, this is basically a smaller version of a skid steer. It's about the size of a dishwasher, right? So 36 inches wide. You don't sit in it, you stand behind it, or you stand on a little lip behind it, or you sit on top of it like this guy in the back. And this would be like a narrow gauge skid steer with a bunch of purpose-built attachments for grading, mechanically compacting, earth moving, stuff like that. Call them like dingoes instead of bobcats, that sort of thing. These are really cool. You can get a bunch of really high quality trail built like that. You don't have to destroy a bunch of extra territory to get a full-size Caterpillar bulldozer through there. Like if you're cutting fire lines, for example, you got to ruin a bunch of territory to get where you're going. These are pretty agile. They're not very expensive. So yeah, if you like doing a bunch of this stuff, like if you want to build something and see the effort of your labor reflected on the surface of the earth, dingoes and stuff like that, super awesome. Now back to the less serious side of stuff. Right, meme culture in the early 2010s has given a bunch of people some pretty ill-considered ideas about what is funny or safe or wise in the wild. So this is a simulated video, or image. This person didn't actually make chili soap. This is just a crappy airbrushing, right? You can tell by the way the pixels are. okay? But the thing is, out of the billion people that see this image, if 0.001% of those billion people see this and think, ooh, let me try that. I know how to make soap. Let me mix in some chili beans, some chili spices, and see how it works in the shower, see how it works in bear country, right? Somebody's going to try it. And this is how sometimes, not often, but sometimes we get bear attacks and stuff like that. And then we have to deal with an actual bear attack because somebody saw a spicy meme and wanted to get after it. So we want to not be Luddites. We don't want to turn our back on all of this technological advancement because it's never going to stop, right? So every possible environment, every possible ecosystem, we need to review it in terms of every possible way to get humans into it that we have thought of and that we haven't thought of yet, but somebody will. And every possible way for humans to move through that environment, whether or not it's been invented yet, right? So this is basically a pair of jet ski engines it's basically like a huge floating inner tube. It's a gigantic water pump, basically. And then the water is pumped at high pressure and speed through that hose, and it provides thrust. And so you can basically fly on these hydrojets. It's lots of fun. It's a blast. This is a totally new way to move through a marine or freshwater environment. Like, this is just fun, right? Pay $100 an hour for this and just go hog wild. Do aerobatics, flips. This also propels you at high speed underwater, right? Like, this is really cool. And the impeller pumps that need to drive that much water jets, they are extremely loud. We've all heard jet skis, right? Ski-doos and stuff like that, right? This has one or two equivalents of those packed into one. And water transmits sound really, really far. Remember, whales can communicate and relay messages to distant pods across the entire Pacific Ocean, which is thousands of miles wide. So this super new, cool, fun way to move through this marine or freshwater environment has absolutely crazy noise pollution underwater. And most of us are not thinking along those lines. So that means any creatures that need those particular acoustic frequencies in order to hear predators approaching, to hear mating signalment, to hear any other kind of communication between individuals of that species, the acoustic niche that those species are in, this is taking a jackhammer to all of that, right? It sounds kind of like a jackhammer, almost. So all I had to say, right, this isn't good or evil. We just have to, as professionals in park and wildlife management, we need to see the benefit, the motivation underlying why people seek out that benefit, and also the ecological price tag of it, right? So if this is any kind of leaky, cheap motor, it's discharging petrochemicals into the water and blasting out noise into that water at great distances, right? So one person ecologically can take over this entire bay that they're in, okay? So something to think about. We were so busy asking whether we could, we forgot to ask whether we should, right? So, right, there's 1,000,001 videos of this, just people hot dogging and being dumb, and sometimes there are ecological consequences with it, right? Like, that thing ain't coming out for a while, so it's going to be leaking chemicals for a period of months until thaw, and a truck with a come along can get over there. Ecological consequences, right? This is kind of a downer moment, but hey. But, right, we are never not going to be doing these things, and we'll end on the next slide. So you see the snorkel on this thing? That can go into 5-6 feet of water and be fine. It can climb a basically vertical mud wall, and there's an ecological price tag associated with it in terms of carbon into the atmosphere, in terms of soil and water impacts, in terms of acoustic and noise impacts, and sometimes Basic physical impacts. Okay, we'll end on this. We'll see you on Thursday. We'll finish up this section and get you guys all situated for Thanksgiving break, end of the semester. I'm around for questions if you have them. Congratulations to everybody who's getting those job applications out there. We're starting to see some success with those already. So if that is not you yet, happy to meet with you after class here. Let's get your resume going. Let's get you going. Thank you. See ya.